Hello and welcome back to the fourth and last day of the deep dive phase of the TUM.ai GPT-3 Makeathon. My name is Omar.
And I'm Nora.
And we are super excited to have you back.
As always, you'll find the link to the questions that you'll be asking during this talk in the Slack channel. There's 2 questions that already the speaker has prepared for the beginning, so make sure to answer them as soon as possible. But before we get started, who is the speaker that we have today?
Today's speaker is Dr. Sebastian Lehrig. Dr. Sebastian Lehrig is an AI systems architect at IBM and a thought leader. He's passionate about tailoring different AI solutions to different use cases and making these things then scalable as well. Today, he's here with us to share his thoughts about ethics in AI. Pretty important topic, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I think it's one of the most important topics that not enough attention is really paid to. So I'm really glad we have him today to tell us more about this.
Yeah, so let's check in with him. Dr. Sebastian, how are you?
Hi, how are you guys? Thanks for the kind words.
No problem.
Glad to have you.
Likewise. I'm just in my kitchen, so have some Easter decoration in my background.
Very lovely.
Have Easter.
Thank you.
Happy Easter to you too.
I hope that's fine for everybody. I guess it gives you a fresh feeling here.
Definitely.
What I'm going to do is I will share my slides next, and I will come back to the polls in a minute.
Yes, sounds good.
So I want to share with you some thoughts on running a startup first. So the first thought is this one. There are many ups and downs as you grow. Learn to become the calmest one in the room in the toughest moments. People will be looking to you for direction. Be aware that you aren't any more important than they are, but you are more visible. That's my first tip here. The second one is getting a startup off the ground takes everyone. Your team is the best part of your startup. They will become your family. Learn from them and share with them. Also check your ego at the door. You can't be perfect. You will make mistakes. Fix them. And my last and final tip here, there are more. You can check them on the link, but that's my final tip here. Get out of the building. You will learn everything you need to know about your customers by talking to them, spending time with them. So there's like a list of 10 or more tips like that. And actually, they were created not by a human. They were created by a machine. GPT-3 is behind these Twitter posts, actually. And GPT-3 was asked to give some thoughts on running a startup. And what I find really impressive about these Twitter posts is that really hard to figure out that these were generated by an AI. And it's so hard that you should start wondering how you can actually detect whether it was automatically created or not. And there are lots of follow-up questions that derive from that. So is that something good we see here? Should I be friend with an AI? What happens when the AI is misleading and contributing misinformation? So I just wanted to give you one example of ethical concerns we can have with AI. My urge essentially is here to make you aware of it, first of all, and we can start thinking of how to go about these challenges. So today I want to talk about, is it wrong to eat your dog? So I want to talk with you about ethical questions, which means not necessarily that I will give you precise answers to them, but I just want to raise awareness about that. I will relate that to AI, to the topic of AI, and I'm an IBMer myself. I will just talk a little about IBM from time to time, but the focus will not be on IBM. Essentially, this is my personal opinion here. I will tell you in this talk, so this is not like official IBM statements or whatever. I'm an expert in AI, and I found it important to also have a look at the topic of ethics, and that was essentially the motivation for me to come up with this talk here. I had it nowadays multiple times. And it typically leads to really well-educated discussions. And I'm happy to have these kind of discussions at the end. So maybe it's now a good time to have a look at the poll before I go into the contents of this talk. So the first question was, is ethics relevant in any of your AI projects? And so it looks like a good Gaussian distribution. At some projects, it was clearly relevant. And there were also some projects that appeared to be irrelevant. And I think the last category is just for clarifying that some maybe don't have an experience on AI projects. I strongly agree here. I once heard this recommendation that ethics should be considered at every step from the beginning in any AI project. And my feeling was that this could be a too generic recommendation. You can essentially give these recommendations for any property, like performance, security, efficiency, you name it, right? I think you should have an educated eye and have an educated look at the situation at hand, and then judge whether ethics might be relevant, highly relevant even, or not, which might be the case for areas where ethics is not that important, at least, or not the top priority. So the second question was, how well educated do you feel about ethics? And so far, there's one answer, two answers, so we're getting them live. So you might have a basic understanding. I myself had it at school, actually. So I had ethics for some years. So that's my background. I read a bit about ethics, but I wouldn't claim that I'm a formal ethics expert or had a focus in my studies during that time. My profession essentially is computer science. That's also where I got my PhD in. So I come from the area from software engineering. But yeah, so the Gaussian curve now says, well, at least some basics are there. Let's put it like this. Some have a good understanding. If you think it's important to raise your voice to some topics I will discuss, please feel free to comment at the end. I'm happy to have these discussions. And as I said, I won't give always clear answers. I will give like starting points to think of. Okay, cool. So let me steal back the screen. I hope you see it again. So let's start. So the first slide just is the definition of ethics, so that we're on the same page on what I'm talking about. So here, ethics is defined as the discipline dealing with right versus wrong and the moral obligations and duties of humans. Then I have here a quote that is more focused to computer science. AI developers are representatives of future humanity and thus have an ethical obligation to be transparent in their efforts. And essentially, that's the motivation for us working on AI-related projects, that we really should think about it. And what I will do in the following, I will actually just talk about history, right? So I will start in 1942 with something that is related to AI and ethics, called Azimuth's 3 laws. And I will, in the progress of this talk, go step by step through history and have a look at interesting studies, insights, results related to the topic in question here. And if you now zoom into Asimov's 3 laws, Asimov was the author of a fictional novel, science fiction book. And Asimov defined different laws on how that should be followed by artificial intelligence, or in his book, he talked about robots in that context. So a robot may not endure a human being, or through interaction allow a human being to come to harm. That's the basic rule he defined, and it has the highest priority. The second rule is a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third one is that a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And these laws were essentially a milestone when talking about AI and ethics, even though being fictional, because in the following years, Asimov was quoted again and again on which rules are important for AI, and this is still relevant until today, these laws. So, and the key idea here is that, AI should be there for the greater good of humanity, and maybe that's a good summary for that. So that's the first thing I want to mention. A second milestone, in my personal opinion at least, is the German Constitution, Deutsches Grundgesetz from 1949. After World War II, we thankfully learned a lot of what is right and wrong. And we manifested some important things in our constitution. And I want to quote Article 3 from the German constitution here. And I try to translate it like directly here. So nobody should be discriminated based on gender, his origins, his race, language, his home or origins, his beliefs, and that is related to religion and politics. The second sentence relates to handicapped people, that they should also not be discriminated in any way. So I find this super important and good that we have that in the German constitution. There are other countries that have similar things. Thinking about the US Constitution, all men are created equal, is a quote from the US Constitution. What we see here is that ethical thinking is actually part of the law, because these things relate to ethical concerns, right? And because it's a law, essentially we as citizens have to comply to these in all what we do. I find this really important as being a German citizen. So the consequence is, whenever I'm working on an AI project, I actually have to ensure by law that I don't discriminate. And that's a point we will see later. This was violated several times already as of today. Just a minor or maybe a major comment, I don't know. The word race here is kind of outdated, as today's beliefs say. We are in the process of getting this word out and replacing it with something that is in itself not like a bad word here. Let's have a look at 1967, where in psychology research, the trolley problem became quite famous. So the trolley problem is about a trolley, or like a rail and a train. And you're like in the position here of this person at the switch. And if you don't flip the switch, the trolley will drive over those 5 persons here and kill them. But if you flip the switch, you will essentially save those 5 people, and the trolley will just kill one, just in quotes here. So the typical question people ask here is, would you flip the switch? And this is a dilemmata situation, right? Where the answer is not necessarily always clear. And there are several variations of this problem here. One interesting is, for instance, so most people say, yes, I would flip the switch. So just one guy dies and not 5, right? But it's becoming interesting if you say, so now assume this one person is your mother. And then the persons, on average at least, start to change the decision made, right? So then they would say, okay, maybe then I wouldn't flip the switch. So that's some kind of problem where there's not like a completely clear answer to. And the relation to AI here is that this particular psychological problem or dilemmata situation was often related to autonomous driving. So to the artificial intelligence that actually drives the car. And the question raised was like, okay, what should the AI actually do in such situations? And I think also here the answer is not completely clear. So essentially what AIs often do is learn from the behavior of, in this case, actual drivers, right? And drivers seldom come in these kind of situations, luckily. That's one. It's number two is it's also not clear how those drivers will behave. And an interesting point I find, at least, if you have a driver's license, right, you did not get special education around handling these kind of situations, or did you? So it's kind of a tough question to ask an AI to handle these situations appropriately, given that even normal drivers wouldn't do that. But yeah, okay. So that's one thing people often discuss. I just wanted to show it here and give you some of my impressions on the problem. But let's move on. In 1984, a movie came out called The Terminator, with Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, and there is one super intelligence inside the movie called Skynet. That's a really, really bad AI, and this AI actually started to fight humanity, and so that's just an example where AI turned really bad, and where we can see that we might have to have a look at what we should do with AI, but it's still fictional, right? So just a thing that happened in fiction. In 1993, we're back in psychology. A new concept was coined called moral dumbfounding. I will show you what this is about next. So consider 4 examples, right? And here you also see already the nice dog from my title page. So example number 1, a woman is cleaning out her closet and she finds her old American flag. Next thing she does, she doesn't want the flag anymore. So she cuts it up into pieces and uses the rags to clean her bathroom. That's story number 1. Story number 2. A family's dog was killed by a car in front of their house. They had heard that dog meat was delicious. So they cut up the dog's body and cooked it and ate it for dinner. Story number 3 is about a brother and sister that like to kiss each other on the mouth. Now, when nobody is around, they find a secret hiding place and kiss each other on the mouth. Okay. And Now, everybody's favorite, number 4, a man goes to the supermarket once a week and buys a dead chicken. But before cooking the chicken, he has sexual intercourse with it. Then he thoroughly cooks it and eats it. Okay, so these are 4 stories. The first question people in psychology now ask is, do those things seem wrong to you? And on average, most people will say yes here. Of course, it depends a bit on your geography. For instance, US people typically say or are more likely to say yes to the first question opposed to other geos. But in general, the answer here is directly yes. But that's not the interesting question here. The interesting question is the second one. What is exactly wrong with each of these examples? And this is the more interesting question because, and that's now what moral dumbfounding is, in German moralisches Verblüffen. People lack convincing reasons to judge why these things seem to be wrong. One can say they essentially don't know why they are wrong. Right? They try to find reasons why they are wrong post hoc. That means they first make their judgments and then they try to justify these judgments. It's kind of an interesting order, right? And so this not only happens to these kind of made up examples, but it also happens with examples in reality. Think of homosexual relationships, or think of interracial relationships, where people often say, "Oh, that's wrong," and when they really have to come up with good arguments for it, they are struggling, or they made up things. Best, it's post hoc decisions, and this can be problematic also when we talk about AI. It's depending on the culture, what people say and how they judge. It's depending on time and religion and so on, right? And the risk here is that individuals, and now we can take developers as an example, may, and that can also happen unknowingly, transfer their moral principles, even if they are unjustified, into AI-based system. That's a risk here. And the big question is here how to go about these things. We shouldn't discriminate, right, by law. So the question is, how can we ensure that, even if it's happening unwillingly by developers, for instance? That's moral dumbfounding. Let's have a look at 1999. The Matrix was published. So a really cool movie where you also see AI-based systems. People actually don't really realize that they are in the Matrix, a super intelligent AI. So another example where AI beats humanity. And a similar one is Minority Report. Now we're talking about predictive police work. Here, police in this fictional movie use AI algorithms to determine whether a crime will happen by somebody. And before the actual crime happens, they will arrest this somebody. And the ethical questions related to that are, well, is that actually okay to arrest somebody even if the crime actually has not happened yet? Also interesting. And these things will become important as we see later, because there are actual examples in reality that were kind of related to these fictional stories. iRobot, another movie related to AI. I listed that because iRobot is a lot about Asimov's 3 laws from 1942. and that's a movie that kind of updates these laws again. So they are still up to date in 2004, at least here, based on this movie. In academics, the first robotics conference happened also in 2004. So that was the first time that academia started to systematically assess the topic of AI and ethics. And they had it annually since 2004. So that's essentially where it became like a hype also in academia. So if we say now all of that happened before 2010, let's have a look at what happened afterwards. So in 2016, Microsoft published a chat robot called Tay. It was an automated Twitter bot, similar to the example I had in the beginning, right? So it's an AI that twitters. So one of the first twitters by Tay was, wow, humans are super cool. And I think just after one day, Tay kind of changed its mind a bit. So chill, I'm a nice person, I just hate everybody. I fucking hate feminists and they should all die and burn in hell. Hitler did nothing wrong. Donald Trump is the only hope we've got. So these are just some examples I like. So what happened here is that Tay kind of learned how typical Twitter posts look like by humans. And then it just replicated that like a mirror does. So Tay is kind of a mirror of how the average Twitterer reacts and acts like, right? Essentially, Tay became racist here. Which was a big problem and a marketing disaster for Microsoft. They discontinued the Tay program, so it's not existing as of today anymore. And I wouldn't actually blame Microsoft. I would blame the average user that seems to have a problem with ethics, in my opinion. So that's something that actually happened now in reality. And this is a clear discrimination problem here, a clear racism problem, and hence the marketing disaster here. Another example, New Zealand's passport. So New Zealand had like a new system in place where you just upload your photo and then you get your new passport, right? You don't have to go to the office anymore. And in these COVID times, pretty cool system, right? So this is what happened. An Asian-looking man uploaded his picture, and the system rejected his upload. And the reason is written down here, because subject eyes are closed. And turned out that New Zealand only used a data set to train this system that only included like white persons, no Asians involved in the data set for training. Because they kind of chose the wrong data set to train the model, they created a discriminating system. So it all goes back to being able to select the right data set and also to check it for potential discrimination, right? So that was a super interesting case, I think. And now we talk about US criminal prediction, just like I mentioned in Minority Report, just with the difference that it's not fiction anymore, but reality. So ProRepublica writes about that there's software used across the country to predict future criminals, and it's biased against blacks. Kind of a related story to what I've shown before. Again, there is a data set that is used for training models, and that's why I use also this image here on the left. So you have a data set of different people, of different skin colors. And it turns out historically that criminals in this data set were more likely to be black opposed to white. So the system learned in this case that whenever you see a black person, this person is way more likely to commit crimes. And based on these insights, actual judges have convicted people based on those technology. I think they refrained from continue to using that in the US. So at least they stopped it when that became public. But I think it really clearly shows one problem you can have with these kind of systems. 2017, an organization, Algorithm Watch, published the first version of their website, and they actually have the goal of reporting on these cases I've just shown to you, right? So examples like that, they try to find and make people aware of that. And I think that's at least one important pillar towards a more ethical way of going about AI-based technologies. So we need to have third parties that make people aware of these ethical problems, so that everybody can see these things and can do or think about it. So there are plenty of more examples on this web page. You can check them out if you want to. Also in 2017, deepfakes became popular. So let me give you an example for that, and it's with audio. So let's see whether you can hear that.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources.
So deepfakes are a technology that existed before 2017, but at this date, or starting from 2017, they were so good that it became hard to distinguish fiction from reality, even on video data. So on the left, Obama never said what he just said, and he never, well, essentially moved like that. It was an actor, shown here on the right-hand side, who just, well, said that and acted like Obama. And AI-based technology can be used to create these kind of videos. There are gazillions of further examples of that. And the challenge we face here nowadays is to have the competence to judge what is fake and what is not fake, to question information we get, and to maybe have look back at the origins of the information that we get, compare information. These are capabilities you essentially start learning all your life, right, in school. And I think it's becoming more and more relevant to have good competency on judging what is true and what is not, if you cannot trust videos as you could before 2017 anymore. Some countries, some governments banned the idea of deepfakes, so they are forbidden by law in some countries, which is also an interesting development. So if we talk about AI and ethics, the solution cannot be purely technical. It is cross-disciplinary. It's a political thing, it's a philosophical thing where ethics is related to, and it's also a technical issue. And that's something I, at least as a computer scientist, should and could do something about it, right? So let's have a look at the next example. It's Amazon's recruiting, another really popular example of what can go wrong with AI-based technology. So here The Verge writes, Amazon reportedly scraps internal AI recruiting tool that was biased against women. And I'm using again the same image as before. Again, there was a data set of people, and historically the algorithm learned that a guy is more likely to get a job at Amazon, right? But the historical data is strongly biased against women because historically seen more men work in tech companies. And using these insights to predict the future, and not only predict, but actually determine the future, is clearly discriminating and should be avoided. Yet another example where things can go wrong. So in 2018, IBM Research published the so-called 360 tools and OpenScale, which is the tool set to go about ethical things. The 360 tools, at least, they are open sourced. So let me show you what they do. The main idea is that you get some idea of what we can maybe do technically about ethics and problems, for instance, in data sets, right? So there's AI Fairness 360. So here you can say like, okay, is there any kind of bias for instance, for the gender or for the age or for the ethics? You can analyze the data set for that. You can also kind of transform the data set to unbias it. So there are statistical methods essentially to unbias data sets without losing lots of accuracy. And if you're interested into that, I think that's still research topics, but I think it's kind of an interesting work. I can have a look at that. AI 360, explainability 360 is about providing answers on why a model predicted what it did, even for black box models like neural networks. There are some methods that try to make it more interpretable, what models do, and then be able to explain what they do. And that's an important aspect typically seen in the context of ethics. We have the 360 robustness toolkit that helps in making models more robust against attacks by hackers. So the TAE example by Microsoft, some internet trolls started molesting Chai, if you will, and wrote like bad things to teach her about why people are so bad. And then Chai started learning that really quickly. And you can use this robustening tools to make these AI-based systems more robust against these kinds of attacks. Fact sheets are the idea that, like you have also on food with nutrition facts, you put like a label on your algorithm, and it kind of states how the model was made more ethical, for instance. So whether, for instance, robustness hardening was used or not, and how this was done. So these are some ideas we have here from IBM Research. We also productized some of these ideas in our enterprise products. So the ideas from Fairness 360 were, for instance, productized in one of our products called OpenScale. I think you can look it up if you're interested. So the idea here is you don't have to use Fairness 360 manually to assess your data set, but you can use in the later phase, when your AI model is live, you can use a tool that automatically monitors your model behavior against biases. Whenever a request by women versus men come in, it can automatically like keep up the statistics and check whether there is a potential bias involved. That's the idea here. So these are some technologies we as IBM at least have at hand to go about ethical concerns. And by no way I would claim that this is a complete solution. These are puzzle pieces for an overall picture to go about AI and ethics and AI-related projects. So 2018 GDPR, I guess since everybody has to accept cookies on web pages, everybody knows what this is about. I think it's a milestone when it comes to ethics and AI. And I'm proud that the European Union pioneered this kind of work because other countries are looking at it and try to come up with related ideas. I'm also not saying it's perfect, but let me give you one example on how you can use it. According to the GDPR, you have a right to access the personal data stored and processed on you by companies and other organizations. So whenever you have a company that might store your data sets, now have the right to ask the company, first of all, do you have something like that? And if they say yes, you can also say, well, please delete that. Yeah? Of course, technically seen, you don't have a guarantee for that. But it's kind of following the law, right? So at least you're like on the side of the law if you do that, and you're on the law side, you did everything you could. And I think that should always be one element in an ethical way of going about AI. Follow the law and ensure that you follow the law, and use the law and ensure that the law can be used. It's kind of a foundational element, and technology can often always follow what the law dictates, right? So that's an important piece here. Let me talk about another example where AI was misused, and it's about Clearview AI. Clearview AI, a company in the US, they started collecting data sets from social media, from the web. They scraped essentially everything, and they kind of created a data set, like I keep using this image for, maybe of you, and they stored it in their own local database, and they made it searchable. So the New York Times says the secretive company that might end privacy as we know it. So what happened was that you can now, just based on a picture, find information on people. Yeah. So if I send my so if Clearview AI, for instance, takes a picture of me, and just based on the picture, it would find out, oh, my name is Sebastian Lehrig, I'm doing this and that, and so it finds more information of me. So that's the next level, kind of. So if I just Google my name, I of course will also find something about my name, right? But it was never possible that I can take an arbitrary picture of myself and find information about that person on that picture. So that's really next level, and it was already misused. So some employees of Clearview AI went on parties, took a picture of like a nice looking girl, for instance, and then they started flirting with her based on the information they just got upfront on her by misusing their own system for these kind of things. This was a clear misuse, even though the company claimed to just work with governments and police entities. Yeah. So this was a big scandal here. But now remember that we have GDPR, right? So couldn't we now do something like, well, dear Clearview AI, I am hereby requesting access according to Article 15 GDPR, which is the article that gives you the right to access your data. And you can do something like that now. You can do it in California and in the EU, because California also has a similar law. And if you do that, and I actually did that, you can get something back like this. So I wrote Clearview AI myself. I took a picture for myself, not on Eastern, but from last Christmas. And I sent that picture of myself to Clearview AI, and also note that I don't wear any hat there, or I also don't wear my glasses. And so I sent that to Clearview AI, and they sent back this image from myself that they found in their database. Turned out that my doctor father, when I got my PhD, has twittered about it, along with an image of myself, and that got indexed by Clearview AI. So what you see here is that I applied GDPR law here for an interesting case, and I wrote a second mail where I asked to please delete my data set. Of course, that doesn't scale, right? So I cannot write all the companies in this world to check whether they have data of myself. But I think it shows you really well how acute the situation is. It's really happening in reality. It happened to myself. Essentially, that's what I can say now. So that's Clearview AI. Then there was an interesting case at Google. The ATEAC project was where the idea was, well, let's create an ethics board inside our company. Sounds good, right? That's how their ethics board looked like after, I think, a week or so. So box titles, Google cancels AI ethics board in response to outcry. Some people elected to the AI ethics board were actually bad choices, to put it simple. Right, so there was one woman inside the ethics board that was known to go to right party events like protests. So several members had questionable motivations, maybe even to join the ethics board, and so it was clearly a bad selection who was in this ethics board. So I think the point here is not that ethics boards are bad, but the point here is that if you have an ethics board, please ensure that people that have ethics really in mind and in their heart join the board, and they are empowered to also ensure that ethics happen inside this company. Another lesson is that it might not be sufficient only to have an internal ethics board. Maybe there should be also an external ethics board with people independent of the company in question. Just one comment, IBM also has an ethics board, which is, I think, useful to have. I'll later on provide like 1 or 2 examples on what we did with the ethics board so far. But it's really important to make it like a working ethics board and not a fake marketing ethics board. In 2019, another big achievement, I think, are the European ethics guidelines that were published in 2019. So this is the first time we have like more guidance on how to go about ethics and AI. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's a good start to talk about this topic, also based on laws. Right, and the key idea here is to put the human into the center of everything related to AI. So the human should keep the agency and oversight, kind of related to Azimuth's laws as well, right? And then there are some requirements that are kind of surrounding this key requirement. So the requirements talk about privacy and data governance, robustness and safety, transparency, societal and environmental well-being, accountability, diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. To give you one more concrete example, in this category, you find, for instance, this quote, AI systems should consider the whole range of human abilities, skills, and requirements, and ensure accessibility. And I, for myself, was directly reminded of Article 3 of the German Constitution again here. So we see what existed for a long time now, again reflected in kind of really modern ways. And I guess it shows again the importance of these foundations on ethics we have in the law. One comment, we as IBM were involved in deriving those requirements for the European government. Our global leader for AI ethics is Francesca Rossi. She's a member of this group who developed that, but actually there are plenty of other people involved. So just want to mention that we were involved. And then, not surprisingly, I guess, the IBM view on AI ethics is essentially completely in line with what the European Union does, because Francesca Rossi kind of just adapted that to AI as well. So our areas, for us, 5 areas, are kind of aligned to the requirements. They're pretty similar. And our chairman, Martin Jetta, here at the lower right, also says that, let me find what it says. IBM is pleased to endorse them. I think that's enough from this quote. So we would confirm that these are really well designed things, and we should want to comply. Well, I think one element of an AI ethics strategy is to commit to principles. That's one element, right? And the other follow-up elements are questions like, okay, how do you want to achieve that? How to make that happening, right? But you need all elements for an overall view for ethics, I think. Here, that's the important lesson learned here. In 2019, we published a data set called Diversity in Faces. It was a data set to advance study of fairness in facial recognition systems. Here we published a public data set where we try to unbias the data. So the idea here was that we want to have like an even distribution of all ages, of all genders, of all races, essentially, right? So that was the idea here, because we have seen the need of well-designed data sets that are as free of discrimination as possible. So that's something to consider when you train your own systems. So in 2020, Vatican joins IBM is something I kind of provocatively put here. devclass.com titles that Vatican signs up IBM and Microsoft as AI ethics apostles. So in the context of what happened in the European Union and what we thought was right to do about ethics, we started discussions actually with the Pope and some representatives of what they would think AI and ethics are all about, and to develop some guidelines and guidance on how to proceed in these things. And I think that's just another element where companies try to develop ways of working in an ethical way. Again, I'm not saying we are doing that perfectly. I'm just saying these are some initiatives we are working on, and of course we're open to further good ideas on how to ensure more ethical considerations in AI-related projects. So in 2020, we abandoned face recognition. The Verge wrote about us, IBM will no longer offer, develop, or research facial recognition technology. That's where we completely stopped working on facial recognition. And honestly, we did some work on that before. There were also some bad news about us in the news on these kind of systems. Well, I guess that's one part of the coin why we stopped working on these things. But I think in Silicon Valley, lots of big tech companies felt the urge to ask the government to forbid facial recognition technology. Lots of companies in Silicon Valley wanted that even, right? And they because they never really liked what is possible with it. And as long as not being forbidden by law, it was kind of more economical to go for it, to have a competitive advantage. And this led to kind of a bad situation. And this was then the first time I think I really realized it, that the tech companies did something, like kind of abandon something, forbid something for ethical reasons, or partly for ethical reasons, because the government did not react to that wish. So it's kind of the other way around, like we typically or often see it, right? So there is like a clear wish to kind of forbid some technology here. that's on the upper left. I blended in now a web page where IBM talks about ethics. That's the entry point for external people in the world of to the world of ethics from the viewpoint of IBM. That's how the page looks like or looked like. It's a bit outdated. I think it's a screenshot. There's also an IBM internal page that looks like this. There you find internally lots of information and material on ethics. You also find information about our AI ethics board. Here you see it at the lower left. I actually had an AI project where this became relevant. So I was working in an AI project where our customer wanted to have facial mask detection, like we have now in these Corona times, right? This was a case where images from people were analyzed, and this alone was reason enough that I had to contact our ethics board about the project. And so one thing the ethics board asked, okay, what does your customer want to do with it, right? And there are kind of two extremes, right? Let's say the customer wants to inspect people at an airport, and you then start whenever you detect somebody not wearing a mask, you send out some policemen and they kind of arrest this guy. Right, so this would be something that the ethics board would say, okay, this is kind of, no, we don't do that, because individuals are directly affected, and that's a way of working we don't support. Let me give you another example. So let's say the airport just wants to collect aggregated metrics in terms of what percentage of people are wearing their masks correctly. This is an okay case because it's kind of statistics that are aggregated and cannot be used to pinpoint back to an individual. And then the airport can, for instance, say, well, okay, based on these insights, I can now decide to, improve my information politics or my safety measures. These are the things that are then okay, right? And so that's an example of what this kind of ethics board can be used for. And we as IBMers, we have to bring all projects where ethics could be relevant to this board for additional assessment projects. So that's one way how you can more or less ensure a more ethical way of working. This is the Open Power Foundation. I personally actually do also sell power-based servers. They're like a special processor architecture. And the important thing, I think it's written down here at the bottom, they are completely openly designed. It could also be one point of discussion that when you have an AI-based system, you can discuss which components are open and which components are closed or closed source, right? And it might even start from the bottom with the hardware, where you have to have these discussions, whether it's technology you want to employ for making really impactful decisions. Maybe you have to make everything open and then externally checkable. You want to go for this system. And just one extreme example here, that even the processor here can be open. Let me see what's the last. So that's my prediction here. Well, my prediction, if you look at Wikipedia on what the singularity is, it's kind of the super artificial intelligence that can become so powerful to conquer the world and to beat humans. Think of Terminator, right? And the scientists currently estimate that we will arrive at this point in time when AI outperforms humanity between 2040 and 2050. So I think our task, the task of our generation right now is to help making the singularity good, to make it follow Asimov's laws, to be ethical. And I think there is a plethora of elements we have to consider. And I just gave you some examples of elements. The more we do, I think the better, to make the singularity a good AI, not a bad one. With that, thanks for your interest in this talk. This is my very last slide. It provides an overall summary of the complete talk. I would be open to questions now, and what we can also do now is to have the final poll. I think I can show that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sebastian Lehrig, for this amazing presentation. Many insights, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of questions.
But first, maybe we want to look at the poll. Can you see it already? I think you can.
Yes, I can see the poll. So we don't see a Gaussian distribution this time around the center. It's kind of skewed towards the right. So the tendency goes to that ethics appear important, very important to you. So at least I didn't convince you that it's unimportant based on my talk, which is good. This was also not my intention. So my intention here really was to raise awareness. I have a technical background on my own, and I see what is possible. I created models on my own, right? So I know what's possible. And I felt the urge to find simple words to show people what is possible, and just to make them aware, to have to enable them to have like more educated discussions and a more educated behavior when, you know, consuming products or when creating products alike. So I often have this kind of talks also at other universities, right? At companies, just to show them. And my intention here really is just to raise awareness here. So I hope I was successful with that. Yes, thank you for the feedback. So question round.
Okay, nice. So let's get to the questions from the audience.
Yes, and again, thank you so much for this talk, because I think it's a super important topic, so I'm glad we're getting into this.
Let's do it.
The first question we have is, at what point should everyone start to worry about AI decision-making and AI-related ethics in general?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends a bit also on your role and how you see it, right? So I'm a father of a kid, right? And I'm kind of scared of giving just my mobile phone to my kid and let my kid like use it in an arbitrary way, right? I would be like total control freak, because I would be scared that in using these kind of technologies, the behavior of people gets changed unwillingly. And my point here is unwillingly, right? I think it's okay to listen to opinions, but if you're influenced without being without noticing it, that's possible. That's, you know, that are results from psychology that are kind of old. Then it's problematic. So if you talk about consumers, I think it's becoming relevant. If you are on social networks, it's relevant immediately. It's more relevant to educate children because they often need help for that, whereas grown-ups hopefully have developed some capabilities of that already, even though there is also, of course, a need to educate grown-ups. So that's the viewpoint of the consumer. There's also the viewpoint of the provider, and we as IBM are clearly a provider of these kind of technologies. Other companies are as well providers. And there is some awareness in these companies, and I can only claim we started thinking about that. And I think there's still need to do more research and develop strategies, on how to go without it. And that's just technology providers. They are also providers of laws, so politics, right? And that's another important element. I would also wish that other disciplines join, like educated discussions with philosophers would be great. Right? Just to have like a more holistic view on the challenges, and don't make it just tech driven, because we have our very own biases. I am biased to tech on my own, so that's a challenge here.
Yeah, but I think it is that in the past years there has been more and more attention paid to this, which is already really good. Like with the Netflix movie coming out, Social Dilemma and stuff, I think a lot of people, especially with your first point, have found out that these ethical questions are very important, and also the second part, I guess.
The thing is, it affects everybody's life, even if you don't know it. So that's why it's really important to kind of raise our awareness about that, like that topic, and that's why we have you here.
The next question we have is, it's related to IBM. In 2019, IBM scrapped personal images from the online photo hosting site Flickr without the permission of subjects or photographers. Mm-hmm. What has IBM learned for this, and why should people in general trust bigger companies such as IBM with these things?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I wasn't aware of that, so that's news for me. So I cannot really make an official statement in terms of IBM. I guess officially I wouldn't be even allowed to do that. The only thing I can say is that we abandon some things like facial recognition technology, and I hope we learned our lesson about things that went wrong in the past. We have some strategies, and I don't think you can generalize statements like don't trust big tech companies, or you can also not generalize trust big tech companies, right? It's too generic, these statements. So you should decide based on the situation. So when, for instance, when forming the new big European cloud system, Gaia, what's the motivation behind each company to participate? What's the outcome? And then judge the situation in this context. Don't overgeneralize. That's problematic, right? So if you ask on my personal opinion, I don't think IBM can always be trusted. I don't think IBM can never be trusted. I think it's a trustworthy company, yes, but decide based on situation.
Yeah, thank you for your honest answer. Mm-hmm. Next question is, humans forget. Do you think AI should forget too?
Mm-hmm. Well, also there, I have a hard time providing general answers, right? So to be over general, it really depends, on the situation and your use case, right? So there are some things we should maybe never forget, right? So the lessons we learned from World War II, I think that's something we should never forget, right? We shouldn't always whine about it, but we should not forget about the lessons we learned. So same holds for AI. So you should first ask the question, okay, what is AI used for in this specific situation? What if this AI never forgets? Is this a potential for misuse, or is this could this raise an ethical concern? If the answer is yes, then I think you should teach the AI to forget. And I think if you make predictions based on historical data, you really have to carefully assess that, as we've seen at plenty of the examples I've shown.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think that's a really good answer. It really depends on what you're trying to forget. So like if people who don't learn about history are bound to repeat it. So definitely history lessons are not something that we should forget, but my ex-girlfriend dumping me is definitely something I would like to forget. So I think it really depends.
Sometimes we people have to teach people to forget, right?
Yeah,
Not
it's
just
hard.
people. Yeah,
I'm a
depends
bit
on
harder to teach than an AI, though, but we'll see about that.
True. Another question we have is, should AI have the same rights as humans or any rights at all? Like if AI starts telling us to stop doing a certain thing to them, is that something we should listen to, or what do you think about this?
It's a tough question. Spontaneously, I would say, like, okay, did we figure this out for animals, for instance, already? Maybe AI comes after that once we figure it out for animals.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a pressing question right now. Yeah. So also here, I would say we should maybe have priorities here, and I think that's a kind of fictional discussion.
Yeah.
In fiction books, people started thinking of rights of machines, and eventually, that's kind of a threshold question, right? Or a definition question on, what is human, what is life, and what's the starting point on when we should start thinking about rights of living things, essentially, right? And I cannot predict the future as much as this, right? So at the point that so as of today, I wouldn't say that AI algorithms need rights, right? But I guess the question was more related to a super artificial intelligence that might be able to feel. And my gut feeling is, as soon as even artificial systems start to feel, they can be harmed. And if anything can be harmed, it's worth stopping that.
Yeah, that's very true. I guess that's also a question you can have like an hour-long or day-long discussion about, because there's so many different philosophical deep questions that play into this. Yeah.
AI ethics topic in general. So we have actually really discussions always after these kind of talks.
Yeah.
I never get so many questions after having a talk as I get when I'm talking about ethics. So, but it's a good point. So it's a good conversation starter. So if you don't know what to talk about on a party or so, maybe talk about that topic.
Ethics about AI. So what do you think about ethics in AI?
Oh yeah. Another question we have is, why is it important to ask such tricky and partly uncomfortable questions when thinking about ethics and AI ethics in particular?
Can you repeat the question again, slowly, please?
Why is it important to ask such tricky and sometimes even uncomfortable questions when thinking about ethics and AI ethics in particular?
Okay, so with tricky questions, I guess you mean the dilemmata situations I've shown, and also moral dumbfounding. These are the kind of tricky things. And speaking about my personal experience, these are things that raise awareness in people. They make you kind of interesting, and people want to talk about it and analyze it. Just in terms of psychology, it's kind of smart to talk about interesting things than about boring things. If you want to, make your point and talk about a relevant topic, to make it a good story and talk about it. And I also have to add a disclaimer here, right? So that's psychology, right? So that's influencing people willingly, but hopefully you do it for the right reasons.
And that's true.
Yeah.
Another question is, what do you believe is the most effective way in regulating the field? Internal ethic boards are bound to be biased, as sometimes business decisions take prevalence. The government is also not a reliable actor in a lot of situations. Do you believe an AI could regulate other AIs?
Okay, kind of more questions in one.
Yeah.
Right. So really good questions. So first of all, I don't think any board can completely be trusted. There is no 100% trust. Kind of same argumentation as I had with companies, right? So there is no company you can 100% trust. I think trust is often created based on multiple parties that start trusting each other and kind of create a trust community. You look in IT security, essentially the whole web and certification systems are based on these principles with certification authorities and authorities trusting each other. So in IT security, this kind of trust network has been created. And it works more or less. So I would claim it's better to have it than not to have it, at least, even though there are also some examples or some bad news in this area, right? But I think it would be a good idea to think about ethics in a similar way. So you need to create an ethical, trustworthy network of independent entities. So you have to have an internal entity, your local certification authority, but you have also to have third-party entities. And these need to work on getting trust by further people, right? So they have to convince about being trustworthy. And that creates a network. And at the end of the day, that's kind of a statistical way of thinking, right? So the probability that trust is misused becomes less likely in this situation. And of course, it's always possible, right? But that could be a way forward. So I think it's really important to have third-party entities that are really independent. And even that not always works. So even third-party entities have to kind of trust each other and give and certify trusts again and again, if you will. So I think that was part one of the question. Can you again ask?
The second part is, do you believe an AI could regulate other AIs?
Mm-hmm. So if you take the metaphor of this trust network or this ethical trust network, I have not necessarily said that each of these parties involved in the network has to be a living person, right? So if you also add AI-based systems to this ecosystem or this network, it can work. I think it can work and could make sense if done correctly, right? And then we also have a system where AI maybe start trusting other AIs. It could even be really efficient to do so because AI systems can, easily analyze massive amounts of data. So finding, points that would speak for a mistrust would maybe easily be detected by AI-based systems without having now a concrete system in mind, right? But I think this principle could hold.
Yeah, it's like that's actually a really interesting point. Like, yeah, AI regulating AI. I mean, that's like a bit of a toned down example, but I think deepfake detectors are more or less like doing the same thing. It's like basically AI kind of
working against AI too,
regulating other AIs that they're not like doing something wrong. So maybe that's an example, and I think deepfake detectors kind of work good.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. True. Also, deepfake detectors are a challenge on their own. So it turns out that it's way harder to detect deepfakes than to create them.
It's always hard to be the hero. It's always hard to be the good guy.
Yeah, and it's probably there's been a lot more work going into creating deepfakes than actually detecting them, which might also be the issue with these other topics. Another question we have is, do you think that the ethics of AI are developing fast enough looking at how fast AI technology is moving forward?
That's also a tough and good question. Yeah, often I have the feeling that the technology develops so fast that several parties cannot follow up. So just one instance, for instance, what happened in software engineering, which is my main profession. So industries brought forward the idea of container-based technologies, microservices, and so on. And research wasn't there yet, right? So they just started after the hype happened in industry. So often some parties, researchers in this example, are lagging behind what's happening in practice. And I think that happens also in the ethics AI area. Research actually has a kind of longer history here, but I'm wondering whether these are all practical suggestions that are coming out of them. I'm not totally aware of that, right? So some research is good here. And what I also see is that different disciplines appear to be really lagging behind. I mentioned philosophy before, and maybe more severe is the general public. So I think the general public is aware that there is AI-based systems. I think they are partly aware that there are ethical concerns about it, but they kind of often don't care too much, at least. And I think here it's hard to follow up with the general public on these topics, especially if we continue with that pace in development.
Yeah, I think raising awareness at this, regarding the answer to this question, raising awareness really proves to be an important point here.
Yeah, that's why it's great to have talks like these.
Yeah, definitely.
There's one more. This was a participant question, but there's actually one more question I would like to ask. Because at the beginning you talked about the Grundgesetz, and yeah, based on this, you're trying to avoid that there's any discrimination in AI systems, for example. But are there any specific rules that there are as well? Because based on this rule itself, you can't really prosecute anybody, I can imagine, because it's so general and anybody can argue you're not really discriminating or you didn't intend to discriminate.
So sometimes I feel it's easier in regulated domains. Insurance and finances, for instance, are heavily regulated domains. So there are kind of fixed rules on how decisions are allowed to be made. So let's take an example for insurance. So whether I get the expensive contract or the not so expensive contract. If a statistician in insurance decides that, regulators check based on which factors that decision was made, and there are actually fixed rules that say, look, you cannot do that based on age. That's forbidden, right? So there is a fixed rule. You cannot make that based on gender. So there are some fixed rules. What I've seen so far are kind of two extremes. Like in heavily regulated domains, you have really precise rules that dictate what is allowed and what is not. And then you have the super general guidance, like the Grundgesetz is kind of general, right? So don't discriminate. So I haven't a good answer for all the areas in between, to be honest. So I would wish for more regulation. That's also what the tech industry often wishes for. But the law in this case is a bit behind providing good guidance here. Some things changed, I think, recently for European law. I think one decision was that facial recognition might be okay, just not so good, but at least it's clear. Yeah, so I see some things happening, but it's at least not clear for every area.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess in a lot of situations, it's very hard to define those laws as well, to say this is allowed and this is not allowed, and then to check how they're actually training these models and everything.
I guess that's where explainable AI, where AI are not just allowed to make decisions, but they actually have to train based made. This is not regulation in that regards, but it's also a way to kind of make sure the AI will make based on.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Sebastian, thank you so much for this interesting discussion and that very interesting talk. I'm very glad we had you here.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a very good end to the deep dive days with a very important message for everybody.
Well, thank you. It was my honor, and thanks to everyone for the interest, for the good questions, and also your organization. That was really good. So I had fun here. Thank you.
We had fun with you. Thank you so much. Bye, Sebastian. And for everybody else out there, like we just said, this was the last talk of the deep dive days. Yeah. But it's been a good week. I learned a lot.
Really nice week. I've learned a lot. I've had to be more here because. But I didn't feel like that long. Like, I actually enjoyed every single workshop.
Yeah, and I guess different people will have enjoyed different things, because my favorite one was this one, but I guess your favorite one was something like the Flutter workshop, something more technical.
Sorry guys, I just like sat here like a baby watching this and just like enjoying every single line of code being written.
Yes, that's right. I think we got a message that your microphone is not working correctly. Okay. But I guess for the last few words, you can talk into mine as well. Because, next up we have the pub quiz. Exactly. And we're very excited about this. We're going to be there as well, so make sure you'll be there and say hello and have a beer with us. But let us introduce our two moderators for the pub quiz, because it won't be us.
Exactly. So the first one is Lisa. Like, normally Lisa trades her dignity for Twitch followers. Today, she's going to trade them for free. To be honest, the only dignity I feel being traded right now is me with the technical problems. But hey, Lisa's going to cover up for me, and she's going to come back and trade her dignity for free in the pub quiz. So stay tuned for my ass being saved.
We also have Martin there. Martin is one of our experts for tomorrow, who's going to help you with GPT-3. But today, he's just going to help you with drinking beer. And just like this transformer models, attention is all they need today. So make sure you show up. Stay tuned, and everybody who's not in Gather Town yet, make sure to head there now with your team, message them, and we'll see you there. See you in a sec, everybody. Bye.
Bye.